and welcome to Open Mic. We're coming to you from the Confederation of Indian Industry, or the CII. On Open Mic, we've been going across India, bringing you the voices of the public. We've been listening to the voice of the voter. This is the voter making of the elections and the leaders who are contesting. Today we are here at the CII to listen to the voice of the corporate citizen. What is the corporate citizen making of these elections? What is the nature of the engagement of the corporate world and the political world? Does the relationship between the corporate sector and the political class need to become more transparent? Is it already becoming transparent? All those questions on our CII Chaupal with our corporate citizens who are all gathered here. Thanks so much for joining us on our CII Chaupal. Let me pass it over straight to the Sarpanch here. There is a spirit of citizens' engagement at the moment that is sweeping India. Citizens are out on the streets, they're protesting, they're voicing their grievances, they're making their voice heard. How does the corporate citizen see himself in relation to these citizens' protests? Are you part of it? Are you wary of it? Do you feel that it actually destabilizes society, or do you feel that it's actually a change agent in the way society is operating?
Well, I'll put it this way. I think these elections, or any elections which happen in India, are the core of our system of governance. Democracy is a great system and we must keep that. I think the vibrancy we are seeing is wonderful. We as corporates also feel we have to be as engaged as anyone else to ensure that the outcome of the elections is the will of the people. I think what's happened now compared to the last...
So you see yourself as part of the civic engagement process,
absolutely.
as the citizens' protests and all the citizens' movements that are going on?
Well, we also have our own opinions, we have our own thoughts, we share them in our own forums. I think now what's happened compared to 2009 is the electronic media and the electronic interconnectivity of internet and Twitter and SMS and all that. I think that has created a lot of excitement of how communication happens.
Right. And you see that as a positive sign, and you see yourself as very much a part of it. Mr. Bhargav, let me ask you, do the politicians of today engage with the corporate citizen, or honestly address the concerns of the corporate citizen, of the businessman, or is the politician still programmed to view the businessman with suspicion?
Well, we have heard many times that leave politics and governance to us. You corporate manage your business,
right,
which I think is changing. And I think our engagement is increasing. You look at, CII has also taken this initiative about creating corporates with 100% voter cards.
Right.
We are encouraging individuals amongst our employees, among our associates, to go and vote. We are enabling. And to that extent, I think this election is a stage ahead of the previous one. And hopefully we'll continue to do that in future too.
Right. But how much of the engagement is reflected on the political side? How many politicians are actually unapologetic about addressing the concerns of business in public? You know, you'll have politicians who are out there promising freebies and populism and free electricity and free water. But how many politicians are actually out there trying to make India good for business?
You know, the politicians across different parties have been engaged with business right through the last many decades. I think the issue is how many of the suggestions, how many of the good policies were translated into action. As you realize, much of the frustration was in the gap between agreeing with something and then translating into practice. But in this election, for example, I think we have seen...
But is there a mental overhaul that the politician needs to make? He shouldn't see the businessman as someone who is necessarily just someone who's very rich or very affluent. How many politicians are actually creating an ecosystem for the arm businessman?
Well, at least some key politicians are, and they have publicly gone on record saying that if job creation is going to happen, which is imperative for the millions of our entry into the job market, it is not government that is going to create the jobs, it is private sector that's going to create the jobs. So that
There's a growing recognition of
huge recognition that you have to work, government and private sector have to work hand in hand to create those jobs and get the growth back. I think there is recognition, more than recognition, there have been public pronouncements from political platforms at most rallies. Which is good news for corporates.
Which is good news for corporates, because they often say that, you know, good economics is bad politics. Is the adage that politicians are not engaging in good economics because it's simply bad politics. Is that changing in this election? Is it changing?
I think, you know, if you really look at it, it is definitely changing. There is a lot of recognition about how good economics can also mean good politics, and you really have to see it over a period of time. If you really look at the last few months, all political parties have actually called us and has had discussions with us as to what could be going into the manifesto. And we see a large number of our points which we talked about are in the manifesto. And if you really look at the broad parameters of reforms,
the reforms agenda is no longer difficult to sell.
Absolutely not.
To the public.
To the public. And if you are really being able to communicate well, you are also and impress upon them. It takes a period of time. You'll have to look at it that if the length of time that it would really mean a good economics would turn into good politics.
Right.
You really need a period of time to prove that.
So it's actually pretty radical what is happening. That in fact that populist rhetoric is actually being turned on its head. People don't believe it anymore. They actually believe the substantive, growth-oriented rhetoric now.
People are understanding. I think as more and more people are getting educated, people appreciate that there has to be hard decisions, and these hard decisions at the end of the day are going to be good for all.
Sumant, let me put it to you. The feeling is that the corporate sector is solidly behind Mr. Narendra Modi, that he is seen as the main man for the corporate sector. Why is that? Why is there this feeling that the corporate sector is completely behind Mr. Narendra Modi? Is it because he's unapologetic about addressing the concerns of business, which is a new thing for politicians?
No, I don't think so, Sagrika. I think it's mostly on account of the fact that people in the current are fairly fed up with the current system and the current situation that we have right now. And after, let's say, 5-6 years of almost sort of policy paralysis, most people just want change. And I think that's also part of human nature. It's been 10 years, we've had the same government. Perhaps a new government can deliver something better, right? Now, in terms of the general sense of what Mr. Modi can deliver, I think you're right. He's talked about robust governance. He's talked about, development, which are all things that so far have been missing from the political lexicon to a large extent. And that is what makes the corporate sector a little bit more excited. A, change, B, change, perhaps in the right direction, will lead hopefully to a higher economic growth and all of the good things that come along with it. But I think I'm a little bit less optimistic about whether this is a systemic change among Indian politicians or whether this is just a response to the current economic hole that we find ourselves in.
I think that's an excellent point. Are we being a little too over-optimistic that politicians are speaking growth language? But let me just get this point to you as well. That, is that the reason why the corporate class is seen to be backing Mr. Modi so very strongly? Because as Sumant is saying, he's speaking...
Seen by whom?
Isn't that the perception?
No, that's the media-created perception. Maybe true, may not be true. So to my mind, to start with on that premise would be wrong. I'm totally apolitical, and I think corporates would like to remain apolitical. CII is 100% apolitical. So this perception that we are backing X or Y is an individual choice, and we should respect that individual choice, whether he's a corporate honcho or he's an industrialist or whoever it is. But to put it in one wide brush, this corporate India is saying that, I disagree.
But you don't think that the corporate sector is backing Mr. Narendra Modi to the hilt?
No, the corporate sector must be backing various people, individuals, parties, regions, state parties. So to my mind, to make that sweeping a statement
is not right.
I disagree totally.
Okay, is that the fact that this is a media-created hype that the corporate sector is backing?
I will just go back to 2004 when media said shining India, NDA cannot go out. What happened? To my mind, what is important is whoever is the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, most welcome, someone else, equally welcome. What should their agenda be?
What should their agenda be
doing for
But I want to just pursue the Mr. Modi point because I see you got excited about that. Is it a fact that it's a myth that the corporate sector is backing Mr. Modi?
I won't say it's a myth because thanks to media, as he said, it's a lot of people are thinking that way. But if you talk to, when I talk to my industrialist friends, they have different views. People have different people they're backing. I can tell you what we are looking for. We're looking for a government which is going to make things, transparent, which is going to allow the private sector to create the assets, to create the employment. We're looking for a government that's going to create an enabling environment, that's going to leave the industry alone to do business. Just do the governance, and just because of one or two instances doesn't mean the entire industry is at fault.
Are expectations simply way too high? Because whoever is the Prime Minister, whether it's Mr. Modi or whether it's somebody else, as Mr. Bhargav has rightly pointed out, there are structural constraints of what the Prime Minister can do, right?
I think while all of us are excited that a fresh burst of new energy, fresh burst of new government is going to propel growth greatly, the CRISIL report is a bit sobering to the extent that it says that 4.5% to 6.5% is eminently doable in the short term. But to think that somebody can wave a magic wand and just get India to leapfrog to 9.5 in a jiffy is not going to happen.
But do you feel that the corporate sector should only be concerning with growth? What about the other factors? What about the larger vision? What should be the larger vision of India's corporate citizen?
You know, the larger vision is very simple. That there is an equity requirement of the country where a large section of the poor have to be pulled up. But you can't have a constant size of the cake and keep cutting larger slices out of it for redistribution. So corporate India has been very clear that we are first for equity, we are first for inclusiveness, and to achieve those objectives, you have to increase the size of the cake. And increasing the size of the cake means corporate India and the government working together. Simple.
So you're coming from a position of equity, but sometimes, you know, capitalism gets a bad name. What about all these allegations that are made about crony capitalism and how certain corporates and business houses are getting too cozy with certain politicians, and this is leading to crony capitalism, not a level playing field for the Indian business. How can that be tackled?
So, first of all, I think you would have to tell us, because you only write those statements, crony capitalism and others, so we don't know enough.
You don't know about crony capitalism?
We don't know about crony capitalism. We know how to go earn our bread and how do we service our customers.
You talked about crony capitalism, and let me address it up front. You know that recently in The Economist there was an article a couple of weeks back where Indian position is way down. The highest position in crony capitalism, if ever, is actually in Hong Kong and Singapore. And they have listed the sectors which are controlled and thus promote crony capitalism, which include issues like real estate, if they are not transparent.
Right.
So wherever the resources are
So the way
under
to control
constraint,
crony capitalism is more reform.
yes, it has to be more transparent way of addressing the restrictive resource which you have at hand. So there are certain resources, whether they be mining, whether it be
But the
land,
state has
etc.
to get out
Yes.
and stop having its discretionary
That's
power
right.
to give contracts to its friends.
Exactly.
Do you feel that sometimes corporate India is made into a villain? Whether it's by the Aam Aadmi Party, whether it's by certain activists, whether it's by environmental lobby. Are you being misunderstood? Is the corporate sector being misunderstood?
No, we relate with the people, not with a few politicians. And when we interact with the people in our organizations, outside on the street, in the shop, I don't think corporate India gets such negative vibes.
I think it's important to understand that for a country like India, we require economic growth on the agriculture side, on the services side, on the manufacturing side. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we require 10 to 12 million jobs a year for the next 10 years. Now, please understand, people say that you're giving benefits to industry, you're giving land at low cost, you're giving tax XYZ. But at the end of the day, one must realize they create jobs.
They create jobs down the line.
Jobs
Down the
and
line.
tertiary jobs. And it's not only in the factories, but they create transport and supply chain and logistics. Wealth generation is not wrong. And anyone who comes out with a corporate entity ultimately comes to the share market. You have 30, 50, 100,000, 200,000 shareholders. They all make wealth. So I think it is important.
That's a very important point.
Rather than bring everyone
Is
down.
is that a mental overhaul that Indian policymakers are yet to make? The socialist puritanism of believing that being rich or being affluent or creating jobs or generating wealth is criminal.
Economy is based on three fundamental features: capital, human resources, natural resources. All the scams, all the scandals, all the headlines last 5 years have been around that. We are still talking about people not getting employment. We are talking about allocative resources and the problems of distributive justice. We are also talking about the fact that we are not able to harness our natural resources effectively to then utilize. But that's where you need capital. So creation of capital and investment of capital is not such a bad thing. But the mindset is not there yet.
Mindset is not there.
The important thing is, unless you get the right kind of capital flow, well-trained human beings and natural resources will go fallow. That's why you need capital. That's why private sector needs to be there. That's why the government has to play a role in partnership with them. And that, unless you address at the policy, whoever be in government, you will never crack the conundrum.
Let's take a short break at this point. Very, very interesting thoughts coming out here from the CII Chaupal. First and foremost, the government of the day, policymakers have to stop seeing wealth creation with suspicion. They have to stop viewing the businessman with suspicion. The socialist puritanism of the ruling classes has to end, because unless that ends, the ecosystem for business simply cannot develop in India. Let's take a short break and come back with lots more on our CII Chaupal. Welcome back to our CII Chaupal. We're talking to corporate citizens about how the relationship between business and politics can change, become more transparent, become more mutually trusting, because the corporate citizens here are saying that still wealth creation in India is viewed with suspicion. Ajay Shriram, I just wanted to ask you, you wanted to say about how very important it is to get wealth generation going, because otherwise the entire infrastructure of social development would collapse.
The whole cycle collapses. You know, ultimately at the end of the day, what is economic growth? Economic growth means that you're actually adding value to the activities of the country.
But what about your social responsibility?
Which ultimately, when the economic activity grows, your tax inflows grow, your number of employment grows, the people down the line get more jobs, and then the government inflow of funds through taxes and other sources is actually what can be used to uplift people who need it. We are all for providing benefits, providing subsidized food, etc., for people who need it. It should be there. But then you have to generate the funds to do that effectively.
It wasn't the problem that the UPA was far too populist, that it was handing out too many of these populist schemes, simply not doing enough for bringing in the revenues.
You know, we've got an overhang, which we hope will go away this time. In the 1956 Avadi session of Congress, the principle of public sector and government being commanding heights was espoused, and along with that was the philosophy of entitlement. I think many, many years after that, in 2014, we are once again, as all of us are arguing, that the commanding heights of job creation and economic growth should be the private sector, and from a principle of giving entitlements to a principle of earning it is the paradigm shift that India is looking for.
And is that person who is going to make the paradigm shift the BJP's prime ministerial candidate? Is it going to be Narendra Modi? Because the feeling is that he is going to make the paradigm shift, that apparently he is going to be the person who is going to make this paradigm shift.
Look, whether he makes it or does not make it, you will have to agree with the proposition that very few can stop the power of an idea whose time has come. If he doesn't do it, somebody else will.
Right. So move away from entitlements and go towards actually revenue creation.
There are two issues. One is, of course, this entire issue of entrepreneurship in India. And we really need to look at creating an ecosystem which will really promote entrepreneurship. Absolutely. And that's very important. Today, we do not have that. So,
why don't we? I'm interested to know, why do we not have an ecosystem of innovative entrepreneurship?
So if you really look at the World Bank ranking, we stand somewhere around 134 in terms of ease of doing business in India. And that's what we are going to address, and we hope that the new government would be able to address as to how you can make it easy for getting your clearances fast. It's not a rocket science. Implementation is important. Some of the state governments are doing very well, and in fact they have created entrepreneurial cells, innovation cells, which help young entrepreneurs actually be grassroots level innovators. So we need a coordinated approach to see how we can really work towards ease of doing business and promote entrepreneurship in the country.
But is it happening? Is it happening fast enough? Is entrepreneurship happening fast enough in the country?
In the last economic survey, it talked about what keeps an entrepreneur awake at night. And there were 4 issues. First issue was that the regulatory mechanism and how do I overcome it. And that's a major, major issue for anyone who wants to put up an enterprise, any entrepreneur who wants to get into business. Second issue is capital and the cost of capital. Where do I procure it and what is the cost that I'm going to incur? Third, being the issue of labor. Will I get skilled people? Will I be able to implement the kind of laws which are there for such a long time?
That is a very, very tricky issue, isn't it? Is there going to be any politician in the near future
small and medium companies
who will be able to enact the labor laws that you want?
For MSMEs, possible. For MSMEs, there could be an approach. There could be, like in the NIMS, the zones, the new manufacturing zones, there could be some ways that a model area could be created. So I think that is the key issue which the next government needs to address.
Let me just get it. I just want to get a response in from Sumant here, just to say you were shaking your head and saying none of this is actually going to happen.
No, I started a business 3 years ago, okay, and I was actually shocked at the kind of difficulty you face in actually just getting a business off the ground. And it's the large corporates like all of us here who perhaps have an easier time actually in getting approvals and working through the system. My concern is that it's the smaller entrepreneurs, the first-time guys, the young guys who don't have access to capital, who don't have such a big support base behind them. They're the guys who really will be the job creators of the future. And they're the guys who are going to have the hardest time, actually. And therefore, we really need to somehow convert our mindset and really democratize business. Right now, the whole mindset that we have in India is, everybody's brought up with the risk protection.
Business.
Exactly. We have go to the civil service. And I think it's only when that happens that you'll really start having a much broader base of growth in India.
Right.
Otherwise, it's always going to be limited to the few corporates, the few large ones, and you'll have issues like crony capitalism continue to confound us for some time to come.
I think that's a very, very important point. The democratization of business, the need to realize that businessmen are let 100 flowers bloom.
The fact is that we know what's our problem. We have the prescription. We know what to do, but we don't know how to do it. And in the ecosystem which has been created, we can't wish away the government. But the fact is, when you have a retired government officer after 10 years of retirement and a career is then hounded by all types of issues.
For taking a decision.
CBI,
hounded for taking a decision.
To my mind, it's lesser of a policy paralysis. It's more of a signature paralysis. Nobody wants to put down a signature, whether it is SME or the large sector, because of the fear of what, if they don't sign, they get promotion, they get increments, they move ahead. If they sign, there would be all types of problems.
Right.
So we need to
I think that's a very important point. Is the anti-corruption crusade stifling business confidence? Nobody's saying we don't want to fight corruption.
The point
we all want to fight corruption.
But
is a puritanism on anti-corruption stifling business?
We have to recognize that corruption is as much a reality. And therefore it has to be rooted out. And that is the key desire, key wish of all Indians, including corporate India. Root cause of corruption is either greed or need. Greed is to be tackled by judicial system, enforcement of law, punishment. The need, the one which we have overlooked is political and electoral funding.
Right.
We need answers. Unless the electoral funding is sorted out, these equations of one-to-one here and there will continue, causing the type of problem and corruption in the society with which we just can't live anymore.
I think that's a very good point. Need and greed have to be combated.
Absolutely. And just to again change tracks a little bit, how do you increase the net? How do you grow that? The only way it can happen is if you start treating a farmer as an entrepreneur. He is creating something. He is delivering a value and he is getting a profit out of it. That fits the perfect definition of an entrepreneur. The minute you take a farmer to be an entrepreneur, you're increasing the net, you're giving him the right amount of dignity and the prospect to grow in a country like this. And I think all the problems can get sorted by that.
Right.
Considering we are an agricultural economy.
That's a very important point. See the farmer for the entrepreneur he is. Don't imprison him in a stereotype of primitivism.
See, I would also like to say, when it comes to money or the profits, everybody looks at the businessman. But our politicians are very shy of talking about industry or the business because they feel that the public at large will see it negative. And this is what has resulted into a kind of a policy paralysis when it comes to the benefit of the industry.
Because when there are cries of bade-bade udyogpati aa rahe hain aur ye hamare sare kuch chhin rahe hain, so then that finds a resonance in the public, doesn't it? So isn't that in a sense, are the politicians therefore just tapping into a kind of public mood?
No. The thing is, only those udyogpatis, whether bade or small, they create the jobs, they provide the resources. So why our politicians feel shy? And that is the reason when there are few politicians who want to talk about growth and development, there are people, including the corporate sector, who supports them. So I don't see...
There still are very few
anything.
modern thinking politicians who are able to approach the corporate sector in a modern way. It's not bade-bade udyogpati.
It's not.
It's like Nagrik ko udyogpati banao.
That's right.
Let the government make possible the emergence of the citizen businessman. The citizen should become a businessman because an ecosystem exists out there to support him. That's where the government needs to move away from stereotypes of businessmen simply as wealthy, affluent, elitists, distant from society. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us on our CII Chaupal. It was a pleasure. You came up with a range of ideas, and I think a very important idea that the mentality of the politician towards the businessman needs to change. It needs to snap out of the socialistic puritanism and embrace the businessman for what he is, a wealth creator on the ground for citizens as a whole. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on CII Chaupal. Thanks so much for watching Open Mic from CII.